So welcome back. In the previous hour, what we studied was the entire big picture, the entire picture of the expert systems. We migrated into the elements of machine learning, pattern matching. We'll continue a bit of the same discussion over it, where I discuss the various types of machine learning, and then we'll immediately move on to the entire paradigm of graph and graph search. So basically, whenever it comes to the concept of machine learning, we know that there's a database of inputs and outputs that we need to learn and summarize in the form of knowledge base, as discussed in the previous session. It can be classified into three fundamental classifications. One is known as supervised, the other is known as unsupervised, and the last one is called as reinforcement learning. There is a slight difference between each one of these three learning, and that is a difference that makes any tool and technique we use for machine learning different from each other. The first one is supervised learning, where we have a database of input and output that is provided to the system, and the system is asked to map these inputs to these outputs. It is trying to train in such a way that it produces correct outputs to these inputs whenever they come. Most of the discussion we took place at that stage of time was primarily intended as a supervised machine learning technique. So basically what we have is that some input is given to the system and it produces some output based on whatever state the system was in. Now notice we already know that my system state would always change, and a change in system state will make the output different from the input. What the role of machine learning is to find out what the state should be. It is to find out the most ideal state for which the outputs are the best given the inputs. So in supervised learning, basically whenever I apply any input, I get an output at the training phase. I already know the target. I already have the target because what I have is a big collection of inputs and outputs. So from this collection of inputs and outputs, I know both the input as well as the target. These are more likely to be called as the target here, because output is the outputs that my system produces. I have a set of inputs and targets. I apply this input to this. I give this input to the system. I get an output. I only have the target. All I have to do is to find out an error. An error is defined by how much my output deviates from the target. So an error can be called as target minus the output. This is the error that is prevalent in my system as of now for this particular input. For this particular input, I have so much of error. Now, once I get this error, all I'm supposed to do is, I'll plot the error here. Once I get this value of error, what am I supposed to do is that I have to modify my system state in such a way that next time the same input is given to the system, the error is kind of reduced. All I'm supposed to do is to modify my system state in such a way that this error, whenever given the next time, needs to be reduced. And here is what comes in the training algorithm or the learning algorithm. So again, what I did was I took an input from this table along with its target. I applied the input here to the system. Based on whatever state the system was in, the system produced an output. I only had the target with me. I said error target minus output, that got propagated over here. I got the value of the error over here. I use this error value learning algorithm basically told me how my state is to be modified. So it tries to tell me how my state is to be modified, and this training algorithm will modify the system state. So this modification is in such a way that next time whenever I apply this input, I'll get in lesser value of this error. Of course, this can never be guaranteed, but the learning algorithm does so in such a way that this error gets reduced. So this is what happened when I took up any input-output pair. So all my learning algorithm is in a supervised mode is trying to do is, it will take the first set, it will apply the input, apply the target, calculate the error, calculate what the modification is to be there, calculate how the system changes the state of the system, then comes up for the second input, then comes up for the third input. Like that, all the inputs are passed one after the other in this manner. It will be the first input, the first target, the second input, the second target, and as a result, the state of the system will be changed in such a format that error for each one of these inputs is reduced. So next time, whenever I give the same input, I am likely to get better outputs. Now this thing was done for one particular input for one particular iteration. I'll repeat the entire process once more. I'll again start off from my first input, I'll feed it to the system, I'll get the output, I'll calculate the modifications, and this entire operation will get repeat. So the number of times I get this entire table to the system is called as the epochs. That in general notation would be called as the epochs, the number of times this table is given. Now again, our analogy towards the normal human learning, what we do is that we study a subject once, we study it twice, we study it thrice, until we get mastered. Every time we repeat this, we have to apply some less amount of effort because we've already done a few things. Similar things happens with this system. So my supervised learning algorithm would be very simple at the whatever understanding we have at present is that I'll say for I equals to 1, 2, whatever number of epochs are needed, I call it epochs. I say for every input comma output pair in my historical database, I say, in fact this would be for every input comma target in the database, I say that the output is nothing but whenever the system is given the input I calculate the output. I can say that the error is nothing but my target minus the output. Sometimes may also be referred to as the output minus target, that denotes the sign of the error. Now I need to do only one thing. I need to change the system state as per this error. So my system state is changed and this process will repeat entire times, and of course I will get my system up and running. This is what happens in case of a supervised learning algorithm, the first category. The second thing that I have is called as an unsupervised learning. Unsupervised learning, in most respects it's similar to the supervised learning, but with one major difference is that I only give the inputs. I do not have the outputs, or I do not give the outputs. Either I do not have the outputs available with me, or I do not I do not give the outputs. Now this is a very interesting system. If I talk about unsupervised learning, it is very interesting. Is that what will be the system done? It it must be very exciting that what the system learn, because here I'm only giving the input. So how is it that the system is going to learn, and what is it that it's going to learn? So firstly, an unsupervised learning is supposed to only find out some kind of patterns in the inputs here. It's only trying to find out some kind of patterns. Whenever a new input comes, it will try to associate them into one of these patterns that it has found. It tries to find out some prototypes in the input patterns that are very interesting. Whenever a new input comes, it tries to associate it with one of these prototypes. What unsupervised learning does is that it tries to associate any unknown input whenever it is given to the system to one of the known inputs. And based on that, you can basically have an idea, basically you can calculate what the output of the system would be. Now consider the classification problems where the output is 1 amongst the entire set. Unsupervised learning is a very useful tool that can be, if you do not have the outputs, you only have the inputs available with you. So what unsupervised learning will do, it will try to find out some good prototypes, and it will, whenever you give any kind of input to the system, it will try to associate with one of these prototypes, and then you know that what probable answer can be. It must be the same as the output of that prototype. That is why unsupervised learning many times it essentially does nothing but one word that is known as clustering. Unsupervised learning mainly tries to cluster out the input data. So if my features or my inputs are nothing but, let me say this is an input 1, this is input 2, and this is what represents my training data. It tries to find out these clusters. Of course, there can be multiple clusters. They can be, if I say it tries to find out 3 clusters, it will be like this, and so on. It essentially provides something known as clustering. Now at this point, I will not delve more into the clustering fundamental. That will be a separate topic of study. Very soon, I am not dealing with what these inputs and feature space are. That will again be a separate point of study. But essentially what needs to be focused, what I will make a reference later on as well, the unsupervised is mainly trying to do some kind of clustering. So the algorithm without that is simple. I give some input to a system that by chance also has a state. The system gives me some output, and based on the state and this output, there is a training algorithm that suggests what kind of modification are to be applied. It tries to find out what is the kind of modification that is to be applied, and this modification is applied to the system. The entire process repeats, and the only change here is might be output, and so it's basically whatever output the system produces, based on that it tries to modify the system state, and everything else will repeat the same, and of course the targets are not there. So for every input in database you calculate the output and you try to modify the system state. That is what is the supervised learning. Now a very interesting development when we only consider supervised and unsupervised learning is known as semi-supervised learning. Problem comes when you try to make systems that can classify web pages. The problem comes is that of course the outputs are known, that what type of output every web page is. So you can make an entire database of same URLs and the extracted features as the inputs and some outputs. But this outputs initially need to be, this database initially needs to be made by a human. So he will have the hectic task of making a large bulky database where he will be manually classifying out the various web pages. And of course, there are numerous applications of that form. Now we do not need humans to do this kind of bulky job. We do not need humans to again and again do some kind of bulky job. So one option would be to apply unsupervised learning. But if we by chance apply unsupervised learning, what eventually happens is that because of outputs not being present, the system does not behave well. There are some limitations in your training, there are some limitations in your entire system, the system may not behave well. So the problem is, you have the outputs, but to compute output is a manual work that is very expensive. What semi-supervised learning says is that there are some input and output pairs, and there is a pair of only inputs. And that's why it's semi. The database contains training database where the outputs are available, and a database where only the inputs are available, the outputs are not available. And based on that, what happens is that the system tries to maximize its contribution and maximize its contribution. So it would eventually happen is that only is critical data you need to mention that the system cannot try to classify. That is very important. It might ask the user to feed in that data, rest most of the live data, because again input the database has to be redundant. They would normally be multiple entries for every class, and that might have more or less the same features. So you don't need to give outputs to all of these. You only need to give outputs to some of the interesting ones of these that are harder to learn, that are very difficult for the system to learn. So making use of both supervised and unsupervised, what happens is that in semi-supervised learning, we try to maximize the system output. And of course, it's the latest fundamental being used in machine learning. Much of it is outside. We'll not be dealing with much of it in this series. The other is what I have as a reinforcement learning. In reinforcement learning, also you have the inputs. We do not have the outputs, but there is a mechanism by which we can judge the quality of the inputs and the outputs. So what happens is that I give input to the system. The system does something, it does its own computation, calculation, it provides me with some answer. And what happens is that there is a judge that tries to evaluate this output. There is a judge who tries to give some punishment or some reward to the system. If the system behaved well as it was supposed to behave, usually there would be a reward. How good the system was, depending on that, the reward can be large or it can be small. If the system was very good, the reward will be very high, and the converse is with punishment. So the intention is to modify the system in such a way such that the reward is maximized. And whenever I say the reward is maximized, I actually mean that if you are using the punishment terminology, the punishment is minimized. So depending on whatever methodology is, my intention is to maximize the reward for the system. So I will again apply some input. There will be some system at a particular state. Based on that, there will be reinforcement. There will be a reinforcement agent that will generate a reinforcement, which is of course a reward, or sometimes known as a punishment, and based on that my algorithm modifies the system state. So that's all that happens in case of reinforcement learning, where I know that how good my system performed, and based on that the system tries to just it tries to maximize the reward and minimize the punishment. So that was onto the domain of machine learning, where we had essentially three classifications. These being supervised machine learning, the unsupervised machine learning, as well as the reinforcement machine learning. Next, we take an entirely different topic, that is the main agenda of the day. We'll touch a bit of graphs only for an introduction, and we'll move straight into graph search. After we complete complete graph search, the intention would be mainly to look at some practical problems and look at what is the intelligence, and then look at how can we develop some good techniques that are able to solve some good real life problems. So, well known, fundamental, this is what represents a graph. These are called as the vertices, and these are what is called as the edges. A graph may conveniently be written of the format of a collection of vertices and edges. This again from the basic graph theory. If I use these arrows, this is known as a directed graph. It means you can go from here to here, but you cannot go from here to here. If I use some straight line, that will be known as an undirected graph. You can go from here to here, you can go from here to here. Graphs may or may not have some weights associated with it. They may have weights, they may not have weights, depending on whatever problem you are dealing with. So that's all that represents a graph. The way that we normally store graphs on computer systems is with the help of adjacency list or adjacency matrix. So if this is the graph, let me say the edges were A, B, C, D, E, F and G, and adjacency matrix would be formed A, B, C, D, E, F and G. And here I basically store a 1 if there is a connection and 0 if there is not a connection. So A is connected to B, I store a 1 here. C is connected to B, I store a 1 here. A is connected to F, I store 1 here, and so on. This matrix is completed. In case of a non-weighted graph, in case if it's a weighted graph, I can store in weights here. So this will be WAB, this will be WAF. Where the representation is Wij, represents the weight between vertex I and vertex J. I store the entire graph in this value, and I can store phi or null if there is no weight. If there is no connection, I simply store a phi. Sometimes when weights cannot be 0, we of course use 0 in the programming methodology. The adjacency list would be quite similar. Here I've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, so many linked lists. So A is connected to B and F, I store it in the form of this linked list. B is connected to, let's say, B is not connected to anything, so simply a blunt and so on. C will be connected to B, C will be connected to E, and so on. Like that's all from simple graph theory that we've got. Adjacency list and adjacency matrix representation when you physically work on a graph. These are normal linked lists. This can be a normal collection, any collection framework, and ILS or something. And based on that, you can store the entire graph into this kind of architecture. What our intention here is not to study the basic graph theory. We'll touch a little upon the graph searches, and then we'll migrate into intelligent searches. So what a graph search means is that you need to search a node in the graph. Only for some time from now, I will be assuming that the entire graph is well known. Any search will always have a source that will be clearly defined and a goal That again will be clearly defined. These are two distinct nodes. What I need to do is that I need to find out, starting from the source, I need to find out this goal. That is what my intention is. For some time I will again assume that this is a directed and weightless graph. It's an unweighted graph. It does not have weight. We'll mainly try to focus upon two search techniques, the breadth first and the depth first search. We'll quickly touch upon both these techniques to see how is it that we are able to reach a goal starting from a source. What we eventually might even be interested is a number of things in that if I find out a goal, what is the path that using which I can find out I can reach this goal right from source. So I might be interested in the path from the source to the goal, or in other words the direction in which the search proceeded to get this goal. Sometimes I would be interested in the distance between the source and the goal, or the distance that I have to travel in order from the source in order to reach this goal. That again might be of interest. So basically every node that we see over here in my search will have a distance parameter, here I assume distance from source. It will have a parent, so basically if my search is like this, in this manner I reach this goal G, the parent of G will be E, the parent of E will be D, the parent of D will be A, and the parent of source, that is the A, is always null. That will be the concept behind the parents. And they additionally have a color. Of course, this is color. Color will help me in separating the various kinds of nodes. Color will help me in separating the various kinds of nodes that I have in this graph. My general template would be 3 colors. There will be a white, there will be a black, and something that comes in between white and black, that will be grey. But imagine you traveling from the source over here and you're trying to go hop by hop, you're trying to go vertex by vertex and trying to find out this goal. White would represent nodes that I do not know about, that I haven't even seen. White would represent nodes that are completely unheard, that are completely unknown to me. So basically as I travel, whatever nodes I get, I change their color. As I travel, whatever nodes I visit in this entire search of the goal, I'll keep on changing the color of these nodes, and hence all white nodes will get converted into either a black node or a grey node. Initially, all nodes would be white. I haven't started my search. As I search, I'll keep on changing their color. So those are the white nodes. The grey nodes are the nodes that have been seen. I know them, but I'm yet to process them. Now there's a term that is known as processing of a node. That means expanding those nodes, trying to find out whatever ahead is there. So grey nodes are the nodes that this processing has not been happened. The processing, of course, is the entire algorithm that we'll be seeing. Grey are the nodes that I have seen. I know about them. I know they exist, but I have not yet processed them. Black nodes are the nodes I know I have seen and I have processed them. So those are 3 nodes: the white nodes, the grey nodes, and the black nodes. What happens is that I firstly do not know about the node. I eventually go up to it, I see it, and that's when it gets converted into a grey node, and then I process it at some later stage of time, maybe immediately, maybe after a long time. That's when it gets converted into a black node. So the life cycle would be from white to grey, grey to black. I'll keep this up. The other thing that I'll introduce is a queue. The other thing that would be processed over here would be a queue. So let me take up this queue, and of course queue has elements over it. This queue will have multiple elements, and this is my working queue, this is my job queue. This is my processing queue. This queue is how I need to proceed. So I'll proceed exactly in this order. Now I'll be talking specifically about the breadth first search. If it's a queue, it is my algorithm is a breadth first search. If it's a queue, my algorithm is exactly a breadth first search. So I start off with the very first element A. It is assumed that all these elements have been initialized to an infinite distance. They have been initialized to phi as the parent because I don't know anything. So I have some defaults. Phi means the parent has not been found. Infinite means the distance is unknown. And color is white. All these nodes are being worked out in this level. And for source A, all I do is that the distance from source is 0. So basically distance of A would be 0. Parent of A would be of course phi since it's the source, and color of A, I will say I've seen it so I can keep it gray. I'll enqueue A into this queue. So in a queue, the data structure maintained is such that I enqueue it from down and I dequeue it from up. This is the point of entrance and this is the point of exit. So you know that the data structure is first in, first out. Whoever comes in first is actually the first one to enter. So I push A inside this queue. My very first element is A. This is how we start with. This is how we start with. Now I want nothing else to enqueue, I start the process to dequeue. I take A out. And I put A under work. I put A out, I put A under work. What happens here is that whenever I have taken it out, my color is changed to black. So I can say this color is put to black. Now I expand. I try to see who are the neighbors of A, who are the nodes that are connected to A. It is B and D. Now I have seen B, I have seen D. So there are three things that I need to do. There are three things that I need to do. I need to update their distances. Now the distance from the source will be 1 more than its parent. So distance of B will be what was the distance of A plus 1, and similarly for D. And the parent of B will be A. And of course the color would get to be grey. I've seen them. In this manner and similarly for D as well, the distance would be distance of A plus 1. The parent would be A and the color would be grey. So I basically put in B here and D over here. B and D will come in from here, they will get enqueued over here. Now again my job is done. I start dequeuing. This time D gets dequeued over here. So B is gone. B is gone over here. Its color is changed to black. And I look at who is the neighbor of B. I look at it, who is the neighbor of B. I'll just remove this for some clarity. Let's say the graph was only this much. I find C. It has only one neighbor C. So I say distance of C will be exactly the same distance as B plus 1. Now distance of A was 0. Distance of B what we calculated here was 1, distance of D was 1 over here. Distance of C will be 1 plus 1, that's 2. The color of course will get to grey. And the moment I say that the color of C is grey, I mean C is included over here, and the parent of C will be B. So basically let me assume a very simple notation of this dots. These are the parents. C's parent is B, B's parent is A. These are the distances 0, 1 and 2. And of course a 1 over here. Now I have two things, D and C in my queue. Again I have nothing to enqueue, so next time I dequeue D. Next time I dequeue D. I come over here, D1. For E, the distance will be 1 plus 1, 2. And for this H over here, the distance will be 1 plus 1, 2. The color both will get grey. The moment I say the color will get grey, I mean it's E over here and H over here. And the parents are updated like this. These are the parents. Again my job is done. No more to enqueue. I dequeue C. I dequeue C, color change to black. It has got nothing that I can expand upon. So no change made, nothing enqueued. It's only a dequeue operation. There was nothing to enqueue. I go about with E. E is gone. E comes over here. Distance of F is distance of this plus 1, so 3. Distance of G is distance of this plus 1, so it gets 3. The parents are updated like this. These are how the parents are updated, and let me say the processing is over. So now I have enqueued F and G. I have only enqueued F and G. I extract out H. Now there's a problem. I get G, but G was already there in the list, so I do not put in G again into the list. Every element will come only once. And how do I know G was only there in the list? Because its color was already grey. The color was already grey, so I can say that G is already there in the list. I do not put G inside this list again, since G is already to be found. So that means the work is done. I do not touch upon G anymore. So again, this was only a dequeue operation. I had nothing more to expand, and so no changes are made. And this parent does not exist. The parent of G is E, it's not H. Because I did not process G from H, I processed G from E. I again do a dequeue operation on F. This will become the parent. I guess if I've already dequeued. After F, the next is G. Now G is the goal, and here my searching stops. I've already reached the search my G searching stops. So if they have more vertices here, they would have all been white. These would have been white. If they were more nodes over here, they would have only been white. So that is how I basically searched upon any node over here, from the source to the goal. That is how my search operation happens. Now if you look closely, this is how my search produced. First, this goal was expanded, then in any order, either here to here or here to here. That depends upon whether you, on expansion of A, you enqueued E before or F before. If you enqueued E before, and any one of them you can enqueue before, there is no priority there. If you enqueued E before, my search will be this way. If you enqueued F before, my search will be this way. So basically my search moves in like this, like this, like this, and it all goes in levels. First, all those nodes are found out that are at the distance of 0 from the source, that's the source itself. Then all the nodes are found out that are at the distance of 1, those are these 2. Then all the nodes that are at the source of 3, that is these 3. Then all the nodes that are at the source of 4. And of course we had reached, so there was no further processing possible. So a BFS would always take in this route. This would be at a distance of 0. This would be a distance of 1, this would be a distance of 2, and this would be a distance of 3. And that is why it's called as a breadth first search. The graph is trying to, you see only the colored nodes. First there was only source over here, then it expanded the next 2 children, then those 2 children expanded their children, and that's how the entire expansion happened. If it could not expand further, of course it resulted in a contraction. That's why it's called as a breadth first search. We move in breadths. So very quickly, an algorithm for breadth first search, which would be needed in for formalism. I say breadth first search for a for a graph G that is nothing but vertices and edges. I need to have a source and a goal as well. The first step is of course to initialize. I say for all vertices V, excluding the source, for all vertex V in G, with the exception that V is not the source, the parents are phi, the color is white, and the distances are infinity. And for source, that is pi of s is of course phi, color of s is, let me say, gray, and distance of s from the source is 0. That's what the initial condition is, that is what the initialization is. After that I need to make a queue, so I make a queue, I simply say initialize queue. Now after I say I have initialized my queue, the other thing that I need to do is I need to enqueue my source. The other thing that I need to do is I need to enqueue my source. So from here I move on here. I will simply say enqueue source. I simply say while queue is not empty. The worst case is the entire queue gets empty. So I have no nodes that I can find out. I have no nodes that I can find out. A queue gets empty only when number 1, the goal does not exist, or number 2, it's an unconnected graph. It's an unconnected graph where source lies at one part of a graph that is not connected to the subgraph where the goal lies. That is when you can have your queue empty without the goal being found. So I say while queue is not empty, I extract out a node V by dequeuing it from the queue. I extract out, dequeue one of the node V. Now remember, because I have taken a queue data structure, I will only extract out from the top and I will put inside from the bottom. So that functionality is already there in the queue data structure. I will change its color. I persist it. In fact, I am on the verge of processing, so might be you will assert that the lifeline of this loop. So I say for every vertex let's say J in expansion of V. Now before doing anything out with this V, with this entirely new node that has been created, what I need to do is check if it's white. If it's white, I'll only process J. If it's not white, I'll not process J. That was the same condition over here. When I came from H to here, I did not process this because the color was already gray. So I did not see. So I say if color of J is white, then only I need to process. Now if the color is white, then I simply say that parent of J is nothing but it's V. I got J from V, so the parent of J would be V. The distance of J is nothing but distance of V plus 1. They keep on adding up. And I say that color of J, it changes to grey. That's all I process. And once I process, I simply say NQ. I processed, I put it inside the queue, and towards the end I simply say that my color of V can be changed now. My color of V becomes black again. I entirely process it. Now this algorithm just needs one thing, that is the termination condition. When would it terminate? And my termination of this loop, of course I am not expecting my queue to be empty, so termination of this loop is whenever I reach the goal. So I apply one constraint over here, I apply the termination condition over here. If V is the goal, then I simply return V. And of course you can, because the parents are updated, you can always go about in finding what this path is, and else I simply return null. The goal cannot be found. Now how do this algorithm will give me this entire kind of structure. How do I find out what the path from source to goal is? You go to the goal node, you find out who the parent is this. You go to this node, you find out who the parent is this. You go to this node, you find out who the parent is this. You go to this node, who the parent is, null, and you terminate. So finding out this simple is simple. You can write a two-line program over here that ultimately computes the path from the source to the goal, or rather from the goal to the source, that you can always reverse. So this was my algorithm that is known as a breadth first search. The other algorithm that I will quickly touch upon is the other algorithm, or the depth first search. The other algorithm would be the depth first search. Again I got a graph. Let's say A, B, C, D, E, F and G. I got some graph here. Let me say this is the source, and let me say this was the goal. This is the goal. Everything remains exactly the same. It's just that in place of Q, I'll be taking a stack. So I need to NQ like this, or stack like this, and I need to destack like this. I need to push like this, I need to pop like this, and rest everything will remain the same. So with a little change in the data structure, the entire algorithm changes. With just a little tweak in the data structure, the entire algorithm changes. The other notation is that the distance are a little bit changed over here. The distance are measured much more global in nature. So I start off from the source A. parent was 5, the distance was 0. I'm starting. I say that the parent was 5 and the color was white. I change it into grey. I've already seen, so I NQ A over here. The next thing I do is to DQ A. This goes out. On expansion of A, I get B and G. I push both of them inside. I push first B and then G. Like this, B will come and then G will come. In fact, first G came here and then B came over here. Their distances would be updated. Now it's 0 over here. For any time I visit any node, I increase the distance by 1. Any time I visit any node, I will increase the distance by 1. And so on, I can go about for further processing this. Now because of exact similarity, I will go about with this. The next thing to come out would be B. So B comes out. I have C over here. So now B is out. Now when I push C over here and D over here, what happens is that C comes over, D comes over here and C comes over here. So G pushes up by 2 locations. One of the locations would be occupied by C and other would be D. So I first push in C and then I push in D over here. That's a push operation. I'll again go about and pop out D here. Now I push in G over here. This is my goal. This is what I will be pushing in. So when I push in this over here, my G shifts, it comes up over here, my C shifts, it comes up over here, and this is occupied by this location I. Next thing, I extract out this and my algorithm is over because this is the goal. So in place of start by taking Q, I'm basically trying to get out the distances. The notation would be exactly the same except for the distance from the source, where every time I visit a node, I will add up the distance by 1, and that is what these nodes will be stored. Now physically there is no relevance to this distance when it comes to depth first search. If it comes to breadth first search, the distances, they actually mean the distance from the source, and if it's a breadth first search, they actually mean the shortest distance from the source. So in any graph, if you have to find out the shortest node of any distance, of any node from the source, you can always use a breadth first search. The value that they represent will be the shortest distance. Not in case of the depth first search. So in place of depth first search, I'll write down a short algorithm for the depth first search. One way is very simple, that I simply change the Q by stack with the minor changes in the distance parameter. The other is that I make use of recursion. I say my DFS graph G of vertices and edges, my source and my goal. There will be some node of initialization over here. That is more or less the same that was happened previously. I'll skip this up. I say for every node V in, I'll say for every node X in the collection V, such that X is white, do something known as a DFS visit on this V. The distance counter is initialized to 0 over here, and my DFS visit over any graph V, it does simply one thing. It does a little bit of processing. It changes color of V to gray. It first changes the color of V to gray. It changes the parent of V that won't be actually defined for this. It will try to expand V, and in expansion on V, it will try to find out what are the kind of nodes that it got. So I've got a node whose color I modified. If I want the parent factor, I can always add it up over here. Here I'll have to take in an extra parameter that will give me the parent with whom the distance was called. Normally, parent of DFS would again not be defined because the parents will not have our relevance. So I'll skip out this factor over here. I'll skip this out. I'll simply say that for every edge vertex y in expansion of V, you simply do one thing. You visit it once. Over the graph y. Towards the end, I need to change the color. Towards the end, I will basically be required to change in the color of this node over here. So I change my color to black, and that's how in recursion this will happen. I will need to update the distance. And my counter will increase. This is the time in which this node was discovered. This physically represents the time when this node was discovered, or this represents the number of expansion after which this node was discovered. And that's how this entire algorithm would proceed. It's called as depth-first search because the expansions are in this manner. It tries to go deep inside the graph. In our case, it got up directly over here, but else it would have backtracked. After going into deep inside, when it cannot move ahead, all the nodes are already explored, then it tries to come back. That's why it's called as a depth-first search over here. And again, in this entire length, I assume the weights to be unity. In this entire time, I assume the weights to be unity. Here I write down the code. If V is goal, then return, or let's say simply that the node has been found out. So that's more or less the same algorithm, except for that in place of stack we've taken in a recursive approach over here, and that's how the entire algorithm went up. So that was for the depth-first search. Similar to that, we'll apply some heuristics and we'll move into the intelligent searching techniques. That will be for the next onwards. We'll try to cover up the A-star algorithm. That is one of the well-known algorithms, and we'll try to search how heuristic techniques are done and how the entire paradigm of intelligence comes into these searching techniques.